Great, everyone. I hope folks have been able to join. I want to welcome everyone to Allyship in Action, supporting the LGBTQIA plus community. My name is Rachel Metzger, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. I am a licensed clinical mental health counselor and one of the behavioral health therapists at Avance Care. I'm so excited and honored to speak with you all today about the importance of being an ally and how we can support the LGBTQIA plus community. I am so passionate about advocating and supporting this community and predominantly work with individuals in my practice who identify as gender, sexual, or relationship diverse. You may hear me use the word queer when referring to this community today. This word has actually been reclaimed by the community and is often used as an umbrella term to cover many different identities. We're also going to be discussing some sensitive topics, but I think they're really important too. We'll be talking around gender, sexuality, the coming out process, the importance of pronouns. And my hope today is to really create a safe and empowering space so that we can all learn a little bit more about different queer identities and how we can create safe spaces and advocate for the community. My passion for this topic is not only professional, but personal. Being a queer person myself, I've learned so much on my own personal journey towards acceptance and strive to be that for other folks on their journey. As we kind of move through the presentation, I want you to feel free to put comments, questions, observations in the chat box. And Lindsay is on. She's going to be helping kind of navigate those questions, and I'll do my best to answer them as we go and when they're most applicable. We'll also leave some time at the end to do a little bit of Q&A as well. I do want to encourage folks to be open-minded and thoughtful today in our discussions and acknowledge that we all may be coming from different backgrounds. So we may have different ideas about some of these topics. We'll touch a little bit on intersectionality and the importance of that, and the importance of acknowledging and learning more about different facets of our identities and how those might overlap. All right, so I want to take a few minutes before we jump into learning a little bit more for reflection. Bringing awareness to our own thoughts and impressions is really a great place to start. We all have unconscious biases, and being able to recognize them is really key to being an ally. So we're going to do a brief visualization exercise. As a therapist, I do this all the time with my clients, and I think it's really helpful. So if you're comfortable, feel free to close your eyes. I'm going to walk through this pretty short script, and you're just going to imagine in your mind, and then we're going to talk a little bit about it. All right, so close your eyes and imagine in your mind a man and a woman. Don't think too much about it. Just go with the first images available to you. Hold those pictures in your mind. Notice what physical or personality characteristics these imaginary figures have. Notice their body shapes and sizes, and then ask yourself why these images or representations of men and women are most available to you. Notice how you feel about the representations, including how it feels to compare yourself to them. I'm curious to hear what folks noticed about this exercise. If you feel comfortable, I'd love for you to share, whether in the chat box, and hopefully Lindsay will be able to read out if we have any comments. And just to kind of share just to get the juices flowing, sometimes what I've heard folks say when they have this, when they do this visualization, is they immediately picture a man as taller and a woman as shorter. Or they immediately imagine a man with facial hair and a woman without. So that's kind of the stuff we're thinking about. So feel free to share any observations, anything you noticed when doing that visualization exercise. And Lindsay, do we have any comments yet? Any observations?
Comments or observations yet?
Okay, all right. We'll give folks just a couple more seconds to reflect. So I'll just share a couple other things that I've heard people share in the past about this exercise. Sometimes folks find themselves thinking about certain gender expression. So certain clothing that's specific to how we think of traditionally a male and a female. Oh, I see someone raised their hand. So Lindsay, is there a way that I can allow that person to unmute and share? Let's see.
Yeah, I've given her or him a permission to speak. Looks like they just need to unmute themselves.
Okay, yes, so that individual who has their hand raised, feel free to unmute yourself and I'd love to hear your observations. And just a note, I'm not going to be using people's names or pronouns just because we want to ensure that we have anonymity as well as being mindful of people's pronouns as well. So I think we just have one individual who raised their hand. So if that person wants to unmute and share their feedback. See if I can do it. Okay, so I'm asking that individual to unmute themselves. All right, well, we'll kind of move forward. I'm sorry to that person. You can absolutely share any feedback in the chat section and we'll definitely come back to it. But I do want to kind of move on just for timing's sake and jump to a couple other reflection questions that we have. And we'll do this via a poll. So these are some common questions that can be helpful to reflect on, just kind of understanding how you first started to develop an understanding about the queer community. So I'll pass it over to Lindsay to start the poll, if possible. And Lindsay, I'm not able to see the poll, so I'm not sure if you can kind of let me know what comes from that.
So we have a couple of individuals that are answering the questions, and I'll end the poll and we'll be able to share those results.
Perfect. Thank you.
actually had a couple of individuals complete that poll. Some of the answers for question number one: when was the first time you can remember learning that some people are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or queer? One particular person wrote, I was about 8 to 10 years old. Another individual said middle school, and another said my sister came out in high school, 1977.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you to all those who shared. It's quite a range there. I think it's not uncommon to have an array of answers to that question. So I thank all of those folks for sharing. What about question number 2?
Question number 2, some individuals said that let's see here. The influence of their initial impressions came from friends, family, or church. And mostly this individual's referring to their experiences in family counseling sessions, and then to engage with their family members' new friends. This individual researched as much as available at the time.
Wonderful. We're going to talk a little bit about how knowledge is power, probably on the next slide or later in the webinar, but thank you so much to that person for sharing. And then question number 3 was, how have your impressions changed or evolved throughout your life? Did we have anyone respond to that?
We did. One individual said it's evolved into a positive, healthier outlook. And another said, I feel more informed and welcoming over time.
It's wonderful. And we're going to talk a lot about how being an ally doesn't mean knowing everything. Being an ally means you're willing to learn, you're willing to confront your own biases. So we're definitely going to come back to that and how it really can evolve over time. And then I'm curious about the number 4 was, what is an ally? What did folks answer for that?
One individual said, someone who understands the life experiences of a queer individual and has the tools to support, defend when called upon, or notice an injustice.
That is a great definition. That is such a great definition. And I think that individual hit on kind of the main points, that it's not just developing that understanding, but is ready to act when needed. And we're going to talk about some key ways that you can really put your allyship into action, because it's one thing to have that knowledge and to have that respect and that acceptance, and it's a whole nother thing to put it into action where you're actually standing up for folks, you're advocating for the community. So we're definitely going to touch on that a little bit as well. I just want to thank everyone who shared. I really appreciate you all sharing and trying to make this as interactive as possible, so I really appreciate that. All right, let's kind of jump forward. Let's see. All right, so we're kind of going to jump into some main things that define what an ally is. The first and foremost thing that I mentioned earlier is an ally is willing to learn. So you really don't need to know everything, but you're ready to learn. And learning can look like being open-minded, practicing active listening, recognizing your mistakes. I always tell folks that if you make a mistake, correct it and move on. A lot of times I think we feel some anxiety around making a mistake. It's going to happen. We are human, but the most important piece is being willing to own it and to correct it and then to move on. And I think that's key. The second kind of main thing that I think an ally should try to align with is working through your own barriers. So barriers could mean a lot of things, but kind of talking about reflecting on your own prejudices or your own biases, kind of like we did in the visualization exercise. We all have based on our experiences growing up, based on our background, we all have developed kind of preconceived notions around gender, sexuality, and relationships. And if we're willing to confront them and own them and look at how they might be inhibiting us from being an ally in action, I think that is another crucial piece. And we're going to talk through some ways to do that as well. And then allies are people who are active. It's not just about a label or a sticker, but it really is about how you act day to day. So whether that be becoming active in the community, volunteer work, attending a pride event. A big thing is also recognizing the privileges that cisgender, meaning that's the word we use, cisgender is when someone is identifies with the sex that they were assigned at birth. So that's cisgender. We're going to talk about transgender later on. So recognizing the privileges that cisgender straight people have that aren't always afforded to the LGBTQIA plus community. Recognizing those privileges goes a long way. All right. I really love this visual. Some people may have seen this before, but this is the genderbread person. And it really breaks down the 4 key facets to gender identity and sexuality. And it breaks it down into 4 different pieces: gender identity, gender expression, our biological sex, and sexual orientation. And as I said previously, I really think that knowledge is power. So the more that we know about what these different facets of identity are, the more we can be an ally. So gender identity, let's start there. That's the brain in this image. This is who you think you are. So it's all about who you, in your mind, conceptualize yourself, how you think about yourself, how you internally interpret the chemistry that composes you. So hormone levels, for example. This is on a spectrum. So traditionally we think of in a very binary way, which is woman, man, male, female. It's very common because we live in a very binary world that we don't always think about it being a spectrum. And so from woman all the way to man, there's so many stops along the way. Right in the middle there is what we call genderqueer. This could also be termed gender nonconforming, non-binary, gender diverse. So there's a lot of different names for it. But really what it means is that person identifies their gender as somewhere between woman and man, or that their gender may fall outside of the spectrum completely. So they may not align with either woman or man. Gender expression is different. It's the outside of the body of this image. It's how you demonstrate who you are. So it could be the ways that you act, how you dress, ways that you interact and engage with others. Gender expression is interpreted by others based on our traditional gender roles. So for example, the idea that men wear pants and women wear dresses. That is based on our kind of traditional gender roles. Gender expression can be fluid. It can change day to day, even from outfit to outfit. It could be different depending on the setting that you're in. So gender expression is the outward presentation and how someone demonstrates who they are internally. Biological sex is, which is the groin area in this image. This refers to the objective measurable organs, hormones, and chromosomes that someone possesses. So this is assigned at birth. Biological sex is not the same as gender identity. And to mention, all four of these are independent of one another, meaning they're connected in the sense of they make up the totality of our identity, but they're completely separate entities. Sexual orientation is the last, that's the heart on the genderbread person. And this is who you're attracted to. It could be physically, spiritually, emotionally. There are so many different forms of attraction. And I want to make sure that I also mention our asexual and aromantic folks. So asexual is an individual who doesn't experience sexual attraction. Every asexual person experiences relationships, arousal in different ways, but they don't experience that sexual attraction. It's not a priority for them. Aromantic refers to an individual who doesn't experience the romantic attraction. Now, they may still experience sexual attraction, but the difference is that they don't experience the romantic attraction. And I wanted to make a note of that because it isn't on the continuum. And I think it's really, really important. And the community itself is starting to gain acceptance for our asexual and aromantic, which also could be referred to as our ACE, our ACE friends. We really want to include them as part of the community because not everyone experiences those attractions, whether it be sexual or romantic. So you will see on the continuum on the left side, it goes from heterosexual to homosexual. Again, those two are really binary. Heterosexual meaning folks who are attracted to the quote unquote opposite sex to them, which really that term opposite sex we're trying to move away from because it dismisses that they're all genders, that there are different genders. So heterosexual, bisexual, homosexual, it is a continuum still. So kind of looking at how those binary, that there is that in the middle. Bisexual is also, it's an umbrella term. So there's a lot of other identities within that, including pansexual, which is someone who is attracted to all genders. So there's a lot of terms, and I think it can sometimes feel overwhelming. The biggest piece of it is being willing to learn, and that's what you all are doing here today. So I applaud you all for that as well. All right. So what are gender pronouns and why are they important? So I think using proper use of pronouns is one of the most important and critical things you can do to be an ally. Gender pronouns are how we identify ourselves apart from our name. So just like in the beginning, I introduced myself as Rachel Metzger, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a female identifying, I'm cisgender. So that's how I use my pronouns as a way to identify myself, to reflect my gender identity. And it's how someone refers to you in conversation. Again, using someone's pronouns is one of the most powerful ways to show respect and acceptance. As if you see in the image here, there's a lot of different pronouns. She, her is a female identifying person. He, him, his is male identifying. And then there are folks who don't identify with the binary. So they may refer to themselves as they, them, theirs. So they may identify as genderqueer, non-binary, gender non-conforming. Another term is gender diverse. So I think again, sometimes it can feel like there are a lot of nuances, and we're going to talk about in the next couple slides. The key is to ask and be willing to correct yourself if needed. I want to pause for a second. Are there any questions that have come through? I don't know, Lindsay, if you see anything that's come through. I just want to take a break to check in on that.
No questions thus far.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. All right. So in addition to the importance of pronouns, gender pronouns, I think it's important to analyze the language that we use. So with this, I have some tips on how to be more mindful of using inclusive language. So if one of the biggest tips I can give is use the language that the person uses themselves. So if someone identifies and shares with you that they are queer, use that word because they've chosen it for a reason. If someone identifies as non-binary, use that term instead of transgender. So one of the biggest tips is to use the language that someone has used for themselves. And then it is okay and often a really powerful thing to ask someone how they identify instead of assuming. So you might ask, what are your pronouns? Or what pronouns may I use for you? And I also recommend practice saying your own pronouns. So for example, for me, when I meet someone or if I start with a new client, I introduce myself. I'm Rachel Metzger. I'm a behavioral health therapist, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. What are your pronouns? And so by identifying your own and then asking, that can be a really powerful way to let someone know, hey, I really care to know how you identify. I really care to respect that I use the right language, that I refer to you in the way that you want to be referred to. Some other examples from the image up here, just some things to be mindful of. I'll just point out a couple examples. So instead of saying both genders or opposite sexes, which I kind of mentioned before, we can say instead all genders. So this encompasses folks of all genders rather than implying that there are only two, meaning male and female. This includes our genderqueer folks, our gender nonconforming, our non-binary friends. So using all genders is a great kind of umbrella term. When you don't know someone's pronouns, say they. That way you're not risking misgendering someone. Misgendering is when you use pronouns that are not aligned with that person's identity. That's where we make assumptions. So using they is a really good placeholder until you know. Instead of saying ladies and gentlemen or hey you guys, instead say hey folks. I use folks all the time. Everyone is another good hey y'all, hey you all. This moves away from the binary language and is more inclusive of people of all genders. So I want to open it up to you all. I think we have a poll for this. And I want to preface this by saying we have all made comments from the avoid saying column. So I just want to ask, has anyone on the webinar today found themselves saying something from the avoid saying column and then maybe learned later on that, oh, there's a better way to phrase that, or there's a more inclusive language to use? It happens. So I'm curious if we can get a poll from folks. I see someone raise their hand. If that individual wants to unmute themselves, you should be able to. see. Oops. I'm going to say the initials just to ensure. So it's KH, if that individual wants to unmute themselves.
Hi, it's me. I don't think I raised my hand, but
Hey.
I'll talk anyways. Maybe I did it by
Oh,
accident.
it might have been an accidental. I'm sorry to call you out. If you want to go
No
back on mute.
worries. I like volunteering anyways. Um
Awesome.
well, one that I usually get stuck in saying is hey you guys. So
Yes.
that's one that I'm making sure I refrain from using all the time just to be
Yep.
more cognizant.
Absolutely. I think that's one that we can probably all, or most of us can relate to. It's just a common, um, uh, I forget the word, but it's not slang, but it's a common term that is
Like
used
a
in everyday language.
colloquialism kind of thing.
Colloquial. Yes, colloquialism. Awesome. A lot of times those colloquialisms, we really have to be super intentional and mindful about those. And so I appreciate that individual for sharing. Um, anyone else want to raise their hand and I can do initials? Let's see.
Did come through the Q&A. This individual asks, are there ever people who get offended at the use of they, them when they feel themselves more obviously he, him, or she, her?
That's a great question. What I would say is that if that individual does express offense to that, it might be helpful to let that person know where you were coming from, that you were working to practice inclusive language, and that kind of the intent behind it. People might take offense to things, and I think it's key for us to want to understand that person. You know, what did my saying that? What impact did that have on you? That's where you practice a little bit of active listening to say, okay, I hear you. And then you can share, my thinking was, I wanted to use inclusive language because I'm trying to practice instead of making assumptions about someone's gender, I'm using they. So I think maybe that could be a helpful way to do it, is to kind of share your intent behind it and then open up a conversation. I hope that was helpful. That's a good question. Any other questions or comments?
Your comments this time.
Okay, all right. Righty, let's move on. All right, so I want to talk about microaggressions. So in addition to being mindful of gender pronouns, being mindful of inclusive language, and being mindful of, this is kind of another additional tool to put in your toolbox. Being able to recognize and call out microaggressions is a really great way to be an ally, to put your allyship into action. So a microaggression is an everyday, subtle, intentional, but oftentimes unintentional interaction or behavior that in some way communicates bias towards historically marginalized groups. So this microaggressions are not only seen for the queer community. There are microaggressions for race, ethnicity, class, so lots of other identities and historically marginalized groups may experience microaggressions. There's kind of three main types of microaggressions. The first is a micro assault. So this is conscious and deliberate form of discriminatory practice that are intended to harm. So an example of this might be, let me think here. So an example of this might be intentionally calling a person who has identified as a sexual or gender minority a derogatory slur, or telling a trans person that they can't use a multiple stall restroom, or even rejecting their entry into a multiple stall restroom when they try to use one. So those are some examples of micro assaults. Micro insults are snubs, gestures, and verbal slights. So these are going to be things like using the phrase, "That's so gay," to refer to something odd or undesirable. Maybe asking a transgender person about their gender affirmation surgery. Or asking someone in a gay or lesbian couple who plays the boy or the girl role in the relationship. So they're gestures or verbal slights. And micro invalidations serve to exclude or negate the psychological thoughts, feelings, or reality of certain groups. So as it relates to the queer community, an example might be assuming that all gay individuals experience difficult coming out, because that isn't everyone's story. Staying silent when something should be addressed or corrected. So if someone you know uses a derogatory slur and you don't call it out, that is another micro invalidation, because whoever's on the receiving end of that micro invalidation, kind of negating their experience. So I'm curious, and we don't have a poll for this, but does anyone want to unmute themselves and share if they've ever noticed a microaggression in the workplace or in, wherever? Has anyone ever experienced or heard microaggressions? And feel free to unmute yourself. Or if you're more comfortable to put it in the chat. Let's see. Okay, I do see something here in the Q&A. Someone shares, "I have had someone ask my brother if he was the man or the woman in their relationship." Yeah, so inappropriate. Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that individual for sharing. Absolutely, that's a good example. I see someone raise their hand. I'm going to do the initials thing again and hope that works. KP. I think I saw a hand raised. Let's see. All right, well, we'll kind of move on if anyone wants to put any other observations about microaggressions in the chat, or later when we leave some time for questions at the end, we can definitely come back to it. Alrighty. I wanted to take an opportunity to talk about the coming out process. I think this is an important topic to discuss, because we may all be in a situation where someone does decide to, whether it's come out to us or we know someone who is in the process of coming out. And I say process because for most folks, coming out is a series of decisions rather than a one-time event. So coming out is a process by which someone accepts and identifies with their gender identity and or sexual orientation, and they share it willingly with others. And willingly is the key word there. They have intentionally chosen to disclose their identity with others. People may be out in some spaces and in others. So for example, someone who identifies as transgender may be out to their friends and family, but not out at work. Another example is someone who identifies as a lesbian may be out at work and not to their family for whatever reason. So a decision to come out to a person or a group needs to be one of safety, comfort, trust, and readiness. So someone needs to feel that it's a safe space, they're comfortable with talking about it, they have trust in whoever's on the receiving end, and they feel ready. It is really dangerous and unhealthy to force someone to come out or to out someone else. I always tell folks that it's not our story to tell. That's someone else's story, to share one of the most intimate parts of themselves. So coming out is a really big thing to be aware of. We're going to talk about do's and don'ts if someone does come out to you. But I think I just noticed in the chat. Oh, okay. Someone said, sorry, I can't unmute, but a coworker was talking about how boys, as they grow up, typically call each other gay when they do something dumb. I said, no, my son won't. Yeah, it's a good observation. I think that's one of those colloquialisms and one of those flippant remarks that gets made that is actually a microaggression. And I think it's incumbent upon us as a community, our teachers, our parents, all of us as allies, all of us within the queer community too. It's not just allies needing to do the work. Everyone within the queer community has to be cognizant of their own privilege and how we're being allies for other identities within the queer community. I think it's key that we point those out and we teach each other how to use more inclusive language, how to call out a microaggression for what it is, and to really validate that person's experience. Thank you so much for sharing. All right, so if someone does decide to come out to you, yay, just know that's a huge sign of trust. That's phenomenal. There are some best practices on how you can respond. This isn't an exhaustive list, but it's just a few tips on how you can respond. So I would say we'll focus on, just for time's sake, on the do's. So know it's a sign of huge trust. Check in with the person on how confidential it is. Have they shared it with other people? Are they keeping it? Are you the only person who knows? So check in about the confidentiality. Remember that their gender and sexual identity is just one dimension of many of them. And we're going to talk about intersectionality in just a bit. But remember, that's just one part of who they are. Show interest and curiosity about what they're sharing with you. And then ask them, how can I support you? What do you need? How can I be an ally? How can I best support you during this journey? Great. So intersectionality. I really want to emphasize how important it is to acknowledge that people within the LGBTQIA plus community are multifaceted and different. There are so many awesome intersecting identities. And so intersectionality is a way that we can understand how different aspects of ourselves intersect, overlap, and how they're impacted by various forms of oppression. It's important to remember that gender and sexual identity are but a few of the dimensions within someone's identity. So I'm curious, we have a poll for this. Can you think of other intersecting identities? What are other identities that you can think of? And I think the poll just went out, so we'll give folks some time to answer.
for some of those answers to come through. We did have another Q&A come through earlier. And the question is, what is something you can say when someone says something offensive?
Great question. Yes. So what you think? So depending on the situation, I would say something that could be helpful to say is to call it out for what it is. Say something like, what you just said is a microaggression. So you're labeling it, calling it what it is. That is hurtful. I would prefer you not to use that language. So if, for example, at work, maybe you hear a colleague say, that's so gay, that microaggression where it's kind of flippantly said. What you might do is pause and, let that person know, hey, that's a microaggression and that's really hurtful to the LGBTQ community. I would really appreciate it if you didn't use that language around me. So that's something, I think, calling it what it is. Again, it's not incumbent upon you to educate someone else. You can offer and say, if you want more information, here's where you would go. But I think calling it out and naming it is really crucial. So naming it and then asking them to stop. I hope that's helpful. That's a good question. I don't know if we got any poll results for the intersecting identities.
Both said religious and spiritual, and then ethnicity.
Yeah, those are two great ones. Religion, spirituality, ethnicity. Some others are race, age, education, ability status, social class, socioeconomic status, rural versus urban, like geographic location rather. So all of those play a role in what makes up someone's identity. And so intersectionality is very complex and we're just really just touching on the surface of it. But I think the biggest takeaway is to acknowledge that someone isn't necessarily defined solely by their gender and sexual identity, and that there are a lot of other facets to individuals, and just kind of keeping that in the back of your mind, that there's a lot of complexity to people within the LGBTQIA plus community. There's so much variety, and so something to keep in mind. All right, happy Pride Month, everyone. June is Pride Month, so I wanted to share a couple opportunities that you could do to put your allyship into action. So I've listed the upcoming Pride events for Raleigh, Durham, and Charlotte. So Out Raleigh is our Pride event for Raleigh, and it's happening this Saturday on June 22nd on Fayetteville Street in downtown Raleigh. It's a wonderful opportunity to get engaged, go celebrate, dress up, learn about different companies that are supporting the LGBTQIA plus community. They have booths there where you can play games and there's shows. So it's just a great opportunity to go out and share your pride. And then Charlotte Pride is happening in August, and then Pride for Durham is in September. And I put the links there for the website, so if you want to take a snapshot of the slide. Also, I believe you'll be getting the slides anyway. I also wanted to just make a note that you could also volunteer for the LGBT Center of Raleigh. There's the LGBTQ Center of Durham, Equality North Carolina. I have the websites, and I'll tell you a little bit more about those resources here in a second. But I wanted to play a game because I think games are fun. So we're going to have a poll here where each of these flags that I have on the screen represents a different identity within the LGBTQIA plus community. So the very first slide had the kind of overarching, and I'll just go back for a second just to show you. So the flag here that we have up on the screen is the most up-to-date flag. The brown and black was added to support our queer people of color, and the circle, well, I don't want to give away because that'll give away the flags, but this is the most inclusive flag that we have to date because it includes some folks that weren't represented previously in the pride flag. So I'll just jump ahead. I didn't want to give too much away. Let y'all guess. Okay, so what we're going to do is Lindsay put up a poll for each of the flags. I want you to guess which queer identity this flag represents. So we'll give some time for that. Lindsay, I don't know if folks finished the poll for the pride flags. Oh, no. Let's see. Lindsay, are you able to read out what folks said?
So for flag 1, everyone that did the poll said that it was the transgender flag.
Yes.
For flag 2, which would be the middle left flag, they selected that it was either the intersex pride flag or the non-binary pride flag.
Yeah, so it's intersex. Yeah, the intersex flag. Awesome.
And for the third flag, some all put in the asexual pride flag.
Yep, spot on.
Flag 4, we had a few folks that said the lesbian pride flag, and another that said the intersex pride flag.
Okay, so it is the lesbian flag. Yes.
And then for the flag 5 on that screen. One individual said lesbian pride flag, and then 2 mentioned non-binary pride flag.
Yeah, that number 5 is non-binary.
And then for flag 6, all 3 said bisexual pride flag.
Awesome, yes, awesome. Thank you so much for participating with that. All right, so I just want to share some resources. You can follow these links and look into each of these. There's some local, the LGBT Center of Raleigh, they have a center in Durham, Equality, North Carolina as well. I wanted to touch on all of the centers have programs, events, book clubs, discussion groups, resources. I wanted to touch on specifically the Trevor Project, which is a national resource. This is the leading suicide prevention and crisis intervention nonprofit organization for queer youth people. So they are available 24/7 all year round, and their main goal is to prevent, to lead that charge, preventing suicide and crisis for our LGBTQIA plus youth. So I'll let y'all kind of look into those resources further. And I just want to speak about this slide. So as I said at the beginning, I am one of the behavioral health therapists with Avance Care. If you enjoyed the conversation and the presentation today, Avance Care offers a lot of different further resources, including individual therapy, therapy groups, more specialized therapy. I invite everyone, if you are interested in learning more about Avance Care Behavioral Health, you can either scan this QR code or you can visit avancecare.com. So I'll leave this up for just a few moments to let folks capture it if they'd like.
I have one question that came through the chat.
Yeah.
It says, could you talk about allyship being more than just acceptance?
Yes, that's a great question. Yes, so allyship is not just showing our respect and acceptance. It's about being vocal too. It's about showing up. I think we equally need allies to show up in queer spaces where it's appropriate, such as going to pride events, volunteering for the center. So it's not just about our words, but it's our actions. It's about calling out microaggressions. It's about attending things like you did this evening to learn more about the queer community. So I think there's a lot of ways to educate yourself, to call out microaggressions when you hear them, to show up in spaces where you can celebrate. I think acceptance is the start. That's a great start, but then we want to really amp it up to show up in spaces. I think it would be wonderful. Pride events are going on, as I said, Raleigh this weekend. For those of you who are elsewhere, Durham, Charlotte, it's wonderful to have allies show up in those spaces as well. Any other questions? And I really appreciate everyone's engagement today and all your questions and comments. Feel free to put any questions you might have.
Thank you for the Q&A. It says, would it be offensive for me just to ask general questions? I want to be more open, but I'm not sure how to connect with my friend who recently came out.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the biggest piece of or tip or piece of guidance I would offer is to ask that person how you can support them. And sometimes they may not know exactly what they need. I think by being someone who they have disclosed to, that's a really good start. I think that shows trust. But I would invite you maybe to ask them, like, how can I best support you? Is it attending Pride with you? Is it attending a discussion group? Asking them for a little bit of guidance on how you can best support them. Any other questions, comments? We have just a couple more minutes. I went a little bit over on time, so I appreciate y'all hanging tight with me. Oh, I appreciate folks who are saying thank yous in the chat. Someone asked, are you in Raleigh? Yes, I am based at the Centers of Excellence on Briar Creek in Raleigh. All right. Lindsay, it doesn't seem like we have any other questions. I just want to thank again. Oh, someone said, I love the genderbread illustration. That was wonderful. Awesome. I love that too. Do you have a support group? Great question. Not yet. That's all I can say about that, but not yet, with a big emphasis on yet. All right, well, I really want to thank everyone for your participation today. It was, again, such an honor to talk about this topic. I appreciate you all, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. Take care.